The wind in Anchorage was so fierce that it made your eyes water. Corporal Ethan Reynolds, a tomb guard of the old guard, didn't even flinch. He stood still in front of the convention center, his polished boots stuck to the stone and his M14 rifle perfectly lined up with the gray Alaska sky. The Russian convoy moved in, sleek, dark, and unstoppable. Cameras flashed, diplomats muttered, and then the convoy rolled in. Vladimir Putin stepped out and looked among the crowd until he found Ethan. "Move him," Putin muttered, pointing at the tomb guard like he was a prop in the wrong spot. His voice was calm but cold. Everyone in the crowd held their breath as they waited for Ethan to move. But no one knew, not the media, not the diplomats, not even Putin himself, that this tomb guard had been through more than a president's order. The wounds he had from Iraq were about to change a simple photo op into a moment that would be heard around the globe. Before I tell you what happens next, make sure you're subscribed with the bell notification on. And tell us in the comments section, where in the world are you watching from? And if you think that principles like honor, courage, and sacrifice are still important, help us keep their memory alive. The dawn in Anchorage was harsh and chilly, the kind that made your breath catch and went deep into your bones. Fog hung over the shores of Cook Inlet, making the rough shape of snow-covered mountains look softer against a dark sky. The convention center looked like a fortress made of glass and steel. The dull light bounced off the front, and American and Russian flags hung heavily above the door. Inside, diplomats straightened up their suits. Reporters changed the settings on their cameras, while security teams moved quietly and carefully, sweeping the halls one more time. Corporal Ethan Reynolds stood still outside on the Widstone Plaza in front of the main doors. He was a member of the Old Guard, or 3rd Infantry Regiment. His polished boots were stuck to the ground, his M14 gun was at the right angle, and his white-gloved hands were as steady as rock. He was used to being still, but today, at a U.S.-Russia meeting in Anchorage, Alaska, his presence was so strong that it could change the air itself. Ethan was 30 years old, and had been to Iraq, where the chaos of war taught him things that no drill sergeant could. Corporal Danny Walsh, his best friend, had died on a dusty road outside Mosul. Danny's laugh could cut through the strain of a firefight, yet his name never made it onto a monument. Ethan had joined the Old Guard after that loss, where he went through the tough training of a sentinel, where every step, stop, and breath was a memorial to the dead. 21 steps, then a 21-second break, a flawless turn and complete quiet. He had to follow those rules because he was an honor guard for the summit. He had brought them with him from Arlington to this frozen plaza in Alaska. His eyes were sharp and didn't blink as they looked past the activity, the cameras, and the chatter. They were locked on a place that only he could see. There was a lot of controlled anarchy in the square. Black SUVs drove in, and the tires made a crunching sound on the icy stone. As reporters fought for space, their cameras flashed like sparks in the dark. Mary Kalmakov, and a late woman with gray hair tucked beneath a wool cap, talked quietly to Rachel Torres, a 27-year-old NBC reporter who was good at finding the narrative behind the headlines. Mary's voice sounded rough from years of living on the windy Aleutian Islands. She pointed to the onion-domed Orthodox church across the inlet and added, "We've got Russian roots here. But roots don't mean trust anymore." Rachel wrote down notes and kept looking toward the conference center. There was a hum in the air that promised something more than diplomatic niceties. She was right. When the Russian delegation arrived, the air changed. A column of armored vehicles, sleek and chilly, drove up with military precision from the Bering Sea. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, stepped out of the doors. His expression was serene and in control. He straightened the cuffs of his dark suit and looked around the courtyard, like a general looking over a battlefield. 6 soldiers in black coats with eyes like flint spread out around him to protect him. The Russian cameras were already rolling, and the people operating them were trying to get a photo of Putin standing in front of the conference hall, where there were American flags, and Ethan standing guard. Ethan was a dilemma for the Russians, since he was a soldier in a flawless uniform standing exactly where they didn't want him to be. Putin stopped in the middle of the plaza and stared at Ethan. He turned his head to the side like he was trying to figure out how strong his opponent was. "Why is he standing there?" he inquired in English, his voice quiet but clear enough to hear. A wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses leaned in and said something in Russian to one of his aides. Putin's lips moved, but he didn't smile. "Get him out of the shot," he yelled louder now, waving his hand at Ethan. "I want the building, not the statue." There was a murmur in the crowd. A few American reporters looked at each other and knew they had a story. Rachel Torres raised her camera, and her heart raced. This was not a normal time. A broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a scar over his left eyebrow walked forward. He was on Putin's security squad. As he got closer to the velvet rope that marked Ethan's post, his boots clicked on the stone. "Soldier," he said, his English thick with an accent, "step aside. We need this space." Ethan stayed still. He kept his eyes on the horizon and his body was quite disciplined. The guard hesitated and looked back at Putin, who arched an eyebrow, apparently not used to being disobeyed. The gathering got quieter, and the air was thick with anticipation. Rachel zoomed in on her lens and saw the little strain in the Russian guard's jaw. Colonel Elizabeth Liz Carter came out from the edge of the square. Her uniform was neat, and her silver hair was pushed back tightly. She was 48 and had been in the Middle East for a long time. She was a commander who had based her career on the strict rules of the old guard. She had been in charge of the honor guard detail for the summit, and when she saw a foreign security team getting too close to her Sentinel's position, she narrowed her eyes. She walked forward, her boots making a loud noise that showed she was in charge, and stood between Ethan and the Russian soldier. "Sir," she answered, her voice firm but harsh as steel, "this is an active honor guard post under U.S. Army jurisdiction. The Sentinel does not move without my orders." The Russian guard stopped moving and held his hand close to the rope. He turned to look at Putin again. Putin was now watching with a mix of delight and anger. "Is this how you do things here?" Putin yelled, as his voice echoed across the courtyard. "A soldier who can't move out of the way for a simple picture." Liz didn't move. "This soldier stands for all the soldiers who have died for our country," she remarked. "His post is sacred. You should respect it." Now the throng was quiet, and every camera was focused on the situation. Rachel's pulse raced as she filmed, knowing that this was the kind of moment that could go viral. Putin got closer, crossing an invisible line that most important people understood not to cross. He paused just outside the rope and looked Ethan in the eye. "What's your name, soldier?" he inquired, his voice seemingly casual but full of challenge. Ethan didn't say anything. His visage was a mask of discipline. Putin leaned in a little and said more quietly, "You don't talk, or you don't think I'm worth your time." "Nothing yet." The Russian president straightened up, and his face was blank. "Okay," he said to his assistant. "Take the picture from a different angle, but do it quickly." The stress didn't go away. It got tighter, like a wire being tugged tight. The Russian guard stayed for a while, not knowing if he should go any further. Liz's stare never wavered. She was a wall of power. A junior diplomat in the crowd whispered to a coworker, "This is bad. They're putting us to the test." Rachel's camera recorded every little thing, like the way Putin's jaw twitched. Ethan's shoulders were stiff, and Liz's hand lay softly on her hip, ready to get more serious if she needed to. Ethan was the middle of the plaza, which seemed like a stage. Then things changed. Putin lifted his hand to tell his crew to stop. He turned back to Ethan and looked at him like a man trying to figure out a code. He said to himself, "You've got discipline." "I respect that," he said, pointing to his head of security. "Leave him alone." But that moment wasn't done yet. Putin's team got back together and moved their cameras to a new viewpoint. The president of Russia stayed where he was, just past the rope, and watched Ethan with a gaze that was neither adulation nor disdain. The crowd held their breath, knowing something significant was about to happen. Liz walked forward again, and her voice broke the hush. "Corporal Reynolds," she said, her voice stiff but with a rare warmth. "You can talk if you want." It was an unusual breach from the rules, something that no sentinel saw coming. Ethan moved his head just enough to look at Putin. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady, and every word was like stone. "This post honors the dead, sir. It won't move for a picture." The words hit like a wave of shock. The throng stopped moving. The only sound was the quiet buzz of Rachel's camera. Putin's eyes narrowed, but he didn't seem angry. He seemed to be thinking things over. Rachel's hands shook as she submitted the video on X with the comment, "Simple U.S. Sentinel stands his ground." Within minutes, the post was becoming viral, with comments coming in from all around the country. "That's him," one said. Another person replied, "This is what America stands for." Putin didn't answer right away. He stood there with his hands behind his back and a look of deep thought on his face. Then, carefully, he raised his right hand to his temple in a short, clear salute. It wasn't official or perfect, but it was there, a sign from a man who didn't give in very often. The gathering gasped gently, and incredulity rippled through the reporters and diplomats. Rachel's camera caught everything, and the lens zoomed in on the moment. Liz's jaw stiffened, yet her eyes showed a hint of pride. The Russian security team hesitated for a moment, then moved back as if they weren't sure what to do next. Without saying anything else, Putin turned away and walked toward the entrance of the conference hall. His entourage followed him, the cameras followed, but the actual narrative stayed on the plaza where Ethan stood still, with his eyes on the horizon. The summit would continue. Diplomats would talk to each other, write agreements, and write headlines, but for those who had witnessed it, the moment belonged to the Sentinel, who hadn't moved. As the day went on, the plaza got less and less crowded, and the reporters and important people went into the convention center. Rachel stayed for a while, her phone humming with notifications as her video went viral. She went back to Mary Kalmakov, who had seen the whole thing happen. "That soldier Mary," she murmured in a soft but strong voice. "He's like the mountains, he won't move no matter what." Rachel nodded and started writing her next report in her brain. Inside, the summit went on with well-rehearsed speeches and carefully chosen words. Outside, though, the air felt different, heavier and full of something unspoken. Ethan's shift ended right on time. At 1400 hours, the relief Sentinel showed up. Their steps were in harmony, and their movements were a reflection of the tradition Ethan held. He left the square with the same precision that he had come with, and his boots made a loud noise in the stillness. In the guard room of the convention center, which was a small room with lockers and benches, he carefully took off his ceremonial suit. The white gloves came off first, and they were folded just right. Next came the polished boots, which he put neatly next to his locker. He reached inside and brought out a little, worn military-issue metal case. There was a faded dog tag inside, but it wasn't his. It was Danny's. Its edges are smooth from being held too many nights. There was a voice that disturbed the silence. Corporal Marcus Tate, a younger sentinel who had only been in the old guard for 2 years, commented, "What a day, Hawk." Ethan turned around, and his face was blank. "You spoke," Marcus added with a grin. "On post, in front of a world leader. I didn't think you could do it." Ethan smiled a little, but not enough to reach his eyes. "I was given permission," he answered in a flat voice. Marcus shook his head and laughed. "You made history out there, whether you had permission or not." Ethan didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The other soldiers called him the quiet one, the one who carried the weight of his job like it was part of his bones. He put on regular clothes, a basic jacket and pants, but his stance stayed the same, shoulders square and chin up. As he walked toward the door, a younger officer came up to him with a sealed letter. "From Colonel Carter," the officer replied in a quiet voice. Ethan took it without saying anything, and didn't open it until the officer departed. There was only one card inside. There was no crest or signature, just 5 words written in Carter's precise, careful handwriting. "You stood for us all." He folded the card and put it in the metal container next to Danny's dog tag. There were some things that didn't need to be shown, just carried. Outside, Anchorage was getting dark, and the mountains were dark shapes against the departing light. The conference would go on, and cable news and X would talk about what happened. But Ethan was already moving on, his steps firm and his quiet still. People had seen him today, not as a statue or a backdrop, but as a man who stood up for what he believed in when it meant most. Ethan was back at his post the next morning, right in front of the convention center. The plaza was calmer today. The first day of the summit was full of excitement, but now there was a constant hum of diplomacy. Reporters were still there, and their cameras occasionally swung toward him, but Ethan didn't notice. His eyes were focused on what was in front of him. His motions were exact, and his silence spoke for itself. Rachel Torres was at the fringe of the crowd, and her phone was still vibrating with comments on her video. She looked at Ethan for a time, then turned to Mary Kalmakov, who had come back to see the second day of the summit. Rachel murmured, "He's still there," almost to herself. Mary nodded and looked at Ethan. "Some things don't move," she remarked, "and that's why they are important." Putin sat at a polished table in the conference center, and his visage was as impenetrable as ever. He didn't talk about the event, but one of his aides later told a reporter that he had asked about the Sentinels, their training and their function. The aide stated he was curious, but he didn't disclose why. The summit went on, and the talks were full of diplomatic jargon, but the handshakes and signed papers weren't what people remembered most. The Sentinel, the soldier in the beautiful uniform who had stayed still when the world told him to move, had reminded everyone that certain things are bigger than a picture. If you liked the story, you could send a super chat to help get more stories like this. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear another story that is just as compelling and interesting. It has bravery, sacrifice, and a choice that will make you question all you thought you knew about duty and justice. Click on the video.